Turning to what works, the meat of the book, the findings, you're finding programs and strategies that do this new extended, expanded mission.
Yes.
What are some best illustrations of what you're hoping will be replicable or riffed off of and new versions implemented in different places? What are some of the big learnings?
Well, so I think of it in terms of these prototypes that are out there that are sort of putting all the pieces together in a way that are working. So I can just tick some of these off. I mean, perhaps the most famous is Geoffrey Canada and his work at the Harlem Children's Zone. But you also have many other groups that are achieving similar sort of cross-sector, place-based, comprehensive interventions that are holding themselves accountable to these outcome measures. So for example, there's the purpose-built communities, got their start in Atlanta, but they're now in Indianapolis and New Orleans, have a similar model.
Could you explain what that model is? That's a huge tease with a title like Purpose-Built Communities.
It's a great title.
Great title, but what does it mean?
Yeah, and it's also they're fortunate to have the backing of Warren Buffett, who sort of, I think he says, I only invest in things that work. So he's our someone we're appealing to here. But so purpose-built communities really has a philosophy that you need to really take a community and totally transform it and provide residents who live there with all the tools they need to get ahead. And at the same time, they try to make a community so attractive that they can bring in people who have a choice. Now, they're going to communities where people have no choice. These may be a public housing project, for example, was their first project in Atlanta. And the crime statistics were off the charts. The children, it was the worst performing school in the Atlanta public school system. They had problems with drugs and crime and other things. And so Purpose-Built came in and said, look, we're going to sort of give you the tools to help change this community, but you need to tell us what works for you. And surprisingly, a lot of the residents there put very strict restrictions on themselves. For example, they have a curfew for anyone under 18. That was something that they chose themselves to impose on themselves. But Purpose-Built brings the sort of institutional wherewithal to sort of start executing on the things that the community needed. So they brought in a grocery store. They have a high quality charter school. They happen to be near a golf course, so they actually have they have access to golfing as well. They brought in using Hope $6, a program to try to revitalize public housing projects, enough money that combined with the low-income housing tax credit to demolish all the existing housing. Much of it was uninhabitable to begin with, and build new housing for the residents. And so it's high quality housing, it's a good school, it's access to nutritious food, and now that school, which is in many ways Purpose-Built sees the school as the center of the model, is one of the highest performing in the Atlanta school system, even though 80% of the students are on free or reduced lunch.
Are there other models that you've lifted up in this book?
Another example would be Neighborhood Centers, Inc. in Houston. It's run by a woman, Angela Blanchard, and she's just this force of nature. She's we were having a conversation early on, and I was trying to understand her model, and she says, some people say when you do cross-sector work, you have to have 3 legs of a stool or 4 legs of a table. She says, I'm a millipede. I've got hundreds of legs. I'll take in whatever I can. And she just, by her force of will, knits together all of these programs. But her goal is always clear, that she's going to bring in some of the lowest, the poorest people in our country, many of them recent immigrants in through the Houston area, into the mainstream of American life. And she's wildly successful.
And what's her name?
Angela Blanchard. Yeah. But there are other examples too where you'll see the Local Initiative Support Corporation has a program called Quad Cities, and that's an effort to try to bring together all of these different groups. Many people are experimenting on the edges around this. There's the community schools movement, which is trying to make schools the kind of the hub for all these different services. That's in the same vein as this sort of quarterback concept. But we think we need to sort of find Magnolia Place is another example in Los Angeles where there again it's all about coordinating, but coordinating with an eye to that one stretch outcome goal.
So folks around the country are listening, and they're in localities and they're thinking, wow, this is way cool, but they don't have a Warren Buffett, they don't have an Angela Blanchard.
Yes.
How do they get themselves organized to think this through?
Yes.
There's no template one could take and plop it down in any other community from a different one that's already, there's no such thing as importing wholesale a whole community-wide integrated thing.
Yes.
So what do they do?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And it was something we struggle with in the book too, and it's sort of, and there's a chapter there we call routinizing the extraordinary. You know, and so we're trying to make, so these are all geniuses. These are all people with significant resources backing them that give them the flexibility to do extraordinary things. But what we're hoping for is to go into this next generation of community development and make it so that you don't have to be a genius to get this done, and you don't have to have a billionaire philanthropist at your back either. And that means we need to sort of change a lot of systems that are in place today. And so, you know, one, we need local initiative for that. If we don't have that, we're in trouble, and that's why you need someone to spark it, someone who sort of can be invested. But then you also need an array of different types of services. I mean, the good news is we spend a fair amount of money in many of these communities. It's just not always often spent in the most impactful way possible. So we're trying to figure out ways in which we can sort of do something, for example, change systems around data and measurement, change systems about how you finance things, and change policy. Those are the three sort of system areas we're really focusing on. So in terms of data and policy, it really means you have to be able to come in and say, okay, let's do an analysis of the sort of, what's the baseline here? Where do we need to spend more focus on education, or are we doing okay in that department and we need to focus on crime perhaps? Or, you know, really get an assessment, a lay of the land. But then also put in place a sense and respond capability so that as you're doing things, because once you fix the crime problem, for example, you might find there will be gentrification pressure. So you'll need to start shifting, you'll need to be supple in your approach, because you'll need to start shifting to think about affordable housing development, for example, as the next phase. The sense and respond capability will give you that. But then the sense and respond, the data piece also gives you a chance to sort of show how you can monetize some of the value of the interventions that you've made. So for example, I mentioned the Plaza Apartments in San Francisco. One of the remarkable success stories of that project is, one, it's a beautiful place. I mean, anybody would be proud to live there. But the other thing is that it's had a significant effect on reducing the number of emergency room visits at San Francisco General Hospital, saving the city much more money than it ever put in to the services in that project. And so the data allow you to sort of make that case and maybe even monetize some of the savings.